All right, it's another episode of Rise Up with Marc Mixon. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Mark.
How has your week been, sir?
That's been good. How about yours?
It has, yeah, it's been a good week. It's been, as I was saying right before, getting into the swing of the seasonal change, and the school year has been busy. My mutual aid groups have sort of ramped up. Not that I have ramped up with them necessarily. I've had to have the last couple of weeks off. I was hosting another street medic training, but my local group, West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, we saw nearly 100 people at our main location yesterday. It was sort of off the hook. We're gonna have to have a discussion about how to make this sustainable if we're going to keep seeing these numbers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
You just have to make it work.
nice, and horrific that we keep having more and more people that are food insecure and housing insecure that need our help.
Yeah.
So it's good and bad, and we got another street medic training coming up. This one is part 2. That's going to be about encampment medication, about encampment medicine, which will be really interesting. I'm excited that Medic Viv and Paradox are getting more medics trained up in our area. It's fills a real critical hole in service until we all get health care.
Yeah, whenever that's going to be. I do think that some of the episodes we've done have been more surprising than others, and that one with Medic Viv I had never even really heard of the need or that people were doing that, so that was a pretty cool episode. And to go back to the event that you threw, yeah, it's unfortunate that there may be more people, either that or there's just more people are hearing about what you're doing, and then they're coming out. But I do think that housing insecurity and the cost of everything going up, it's getting worse out there for sure.
It's been sort of a constant tick upward over the last couple of decades. Really, it's been shocking and distressing. But
especially in a major American city that actually is doing well. Like I live closest to the second poorest major American city in the country, so some things stay affordable that way. But yeah, when you're near Seattle, that's a whole different ball game.
It can be pretty unaffordable. And let's use this to segue, because hopefully our guest is someone who's going to be able to help fight to make things a little more affordable in this
Absolutely.
So we're gonna bring on for their second visit Alexis Mercedes Rinck, who's running for Seattle City Council Position 8. She made it through the primary and is in deep into campaigning for the general at this point. So I'm excited to talk to her about her plans and her strategies and how her campaign is going. So why don't we go ahead and run our transition and bring Alexis back on.
I will do that. One moment. And here we go.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. Oh, dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof. Oh, some answers.
All right, Alexis, thank you so much for joining us again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back on this show. Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was so excited to get talking. I didn't do all the little self-promotion, so I'm just going to real quick say, if you like this show, give us a thumbs up. If you're live streaming, hit the like button, and then let's go ahead and talk with Alexis here. So how has your campaign been going?
Oh, it has been, I always say every day is an adventure, and I'm really finding a lot of joy in the process of campaigning, because I love people. I love talking about the issues, and that's a lot of how I'm spending my day these days. And I think the results from the primary really speak to the fact that our message is resonating. Our message
Mm-hmm.
around affordability, our message around making sure the ultra wealthy pay their fair share, and making sure that, and really taking a moment to say, progressives want safe communities too. We have evidence-based approaches that do show results. So let's talk about moving forward with good data and driving our decision making. What a wild concept these days. And these are messages that are really landing with people. And I think the primary results speak to that. And so every moment, I'm not talking to y'all. I'm out talking to community.
Excellent. Yeah. So the primary, you got greater than 50% of the vote in the primary. It was really sort of a blowout. I got a whining dog. Sort of a blowout in that fashion. Talk to me about that. Were you surprised by the results?
I've kind of reflected on the fact, I don't know if any candidate really knows come election night what's going to happen. I think it's always kind of a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
What I can say is I know we've done a lot of hard work trying to build bridges across multiple factions, from different issue areas to like labor and the Democratic Party fully aligning behind this campaign. I got to credit both our local Democratic Party and our partners in labor. It's a united front, and they have been actively getting the word out to their bases. So it really has been, I think, the results are a testament to the coalition that we've built and the willingness of that coalition to do relational organizing, tell their friends, tell their neighbors, tell their comrades about, what's happening on the local level, what kind of things city council can be taking up and should be doing. I really think it speaks to the power of our coalition.
Yeah, it's great that we got labor getting behind you. You certainly do have the full gamut of the local Democratic Party, and maybe not everyone, but when I look at your endorsements page, it looks pretty heavy with that group, and pretty heavy with a lot of activist politicians that I sort of respect. If I'm remembering correctly, didn't your sort of results night party, wasn't that a co-event with Sean Scott? Was that
Yes.
okay?
And we've been doing some shared canvases too, because we have shared bases in a lot of ways. Folks are
Right.
really invested in seeing us both be successful in our races. And so, we're doing joint canvases. Like yesterday, we had an event with IBEW Local 46.
Mm-hmm.
As well as we had a canvas last week also shared with Working Families Party and the 43rd Dems as well. So, we're trying to all share our energy and come together and do things in a coalition. And I think that's been good for the base to kind of draw the dotted line between our state positions. What are the powers of the state compared to also what are the powers that can happen on the local level? So it's been a good coalition building exercise, as well as like just good education about like how do all these various levels of government interact with one another, and why is it important that we're also being connected in this way?
I'm going to sidetrack just a little bit. Talk to me about Working Families Party. I didn't even really realize they were still active in Washington.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that group and your interaction with them.
Yeah, it's kind of a revitalized group. They brought out a political director. As I understand the recent history of Working Families Party, they've had a bit more of an active presence in the East Coast and Midwest areas. And they're just starting to build out their Washingtonian work. So they've put together kind of a steering committee, including a number of organizations and unions that are kind of a part of their steering committee board. And they're just kind of trying to build themselves up as kind of a force for fighting for working families. So, complementary and not, in opposition to the Democratic Party by all means, but rather just trying to add kind of a finer point onto issues that are related to working families specifically. And of course, advance more of those kind of policy solutions and so on. So kind of a newer thing for our region. They've also backed efforts like the Raise the Wage Renton campaign too, had an active presence in that, which I think can all agree has been a real positive for our region.
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, just kind of building back. So, I imagine you'll start hearing more about them as they continue to support some of our local candidates and continue to do this work. King County Councilmember Jorge Baron is also a Working Families Party endorsed candidate as well. And I think as they continue on and keep adding their endorsement to candidates that ultimately win, I think we can expect to see more of the values of their platform and work show up in policy.
Now, I didn't see a DSA endorsement on your page. Is DSA endorsing people? Is there, because Sean is a DSA member / endorsed candidate. Is that true? Do you know?
Yes, I believe Sean is Sean has also been a DSA member for a number of years, and went forward with seeking their endorsement. I have not been a DSA member for some time, and so I'm just starting to build relationship too with the cohort as well, but have not gotten their endorsement.
Well, that's fair. I was not sure if they were giving endorsements. I felt like I saw Sean's. I've not been following his campaign as closely as I should, because I really feel it would be great to have someone like Sean in the State House. I think it would be an enormously positive change for the state of Washington. I'll be honest, I have found this election cycle exhausting.
There's a lot on the ballot. There's a ton on the ballot.
There is. And I've really been trying to focus much more on what's happening here locally, and the more local it gets, the more I've been paying attention. Even statewide, like nationally, I find it interesting, but it's really hard for me to invest in what's going on nationally because there's so much. I have so little positive to say about anything that's happening nationally on either side of the aisle, frankly, that I just need to focus down where it feels like we can make a difference, and there can be some real, well, as you say, like building relationships, building some coalitions, I think that relational organizing is just so important, and not just to get people out for a particular candidate, but just building those relationships that are going to give us some pathways to power in the future. Would you be willing? I really should have gone and re-listened to our first episodes. I'm not sure how many topics about your platform specifically we talked about last time, and I would hate to recover them. But I do want to have you talk some about your platform and about your policy priorities. When I was checking out your page again earlier, and I'm not on it now, so I can't speak immediately to it, but I was sort of intrigued by some of the economic priorities, the budgetary priorities. And there's a group that organized, I don't know if you're a part of them or not, the Seattle Solidarity Budget. Could you talk about, are you familiar with that group, first of all, I guess?
Yes, I am familiar with Solidarity Budget.
How
Yes.
much do your policies align with the Solidarity Budget?
That's a great question. I know they've adjusted, they've changed a little bit throughout the years, but I think broadly speaking, there's the aligned component of how do we invest in the measures that keep our communities whole and well, many of which in the realm of making sure everybody's healthy and housed. And I think that's the major piece of alignment. I've had a real, and I would say the other main point is I think both groups have really pushed for the fact that we need more progressive revenue streams to make sure that we're just having even more tax fairness, but also, our region seems to struggle with shared prosperity. We know there's tremendous wealth that is generated here, and we don't see that wealth show up across our entire community or in, our infrastructure and so on. And so I think, I've been really pushing for how do we have real shared prosperity as one of the wealthiest regions in the country, if not the world, with a lot of, again, wealthy individuals too that live here. What does it mean for this entire community to see the benefit of economic prosperity really shared across the board? And so, as it relates to, solidarity budget, I'm keeping a pulse on what they're pushing for, especially as it relates to the upcoming budget, which does represent a number of cuts to things. I'm curious to know, what are the specific cuts that they are going to be politically pushing on council to address. There's a number of cut areas that, just based on my own analysis, I'm raising a flag about and have concerns about. And looking forward, I think we can be doing a lot more as a city rather than putting forward a budget of band-aids, having a realistic conversation about what are our needs across communities, each neighborhood, and what are the investments that are going to take us where I think we all want to go. So that's what I'm, forward thinking, where I want to get to as it relates to, our investment on the local level.
Great. Yeah, I'm not a tax wonky guy particularly, but I do know that, and I'm going to talk about federal taxes for a second. Not that the city council has much input, but it's just a metric, I guess, to pay attention to. That Seattle pays so much in federal taxes. We fund like 3 Idahos. Like we are one of those. We have become sort of one of the top, I don't know the number, I'm going to say top 5 cities in the nation about how much we contribute to the federal taxes, where we have lots of red states that are drawing down, pulling their resources from federal coffers. And I think it just speaks volumes to what you talked about the amount of wealth we generate here, and then how little of it is truly being shared amongst our communities, that things are getting so much tighter and so much more difficult. Adam and I were talking a bit right before about how mutual aid groups I work with are seeing more and more people that we are trying to share our organized resources among. And just how stark it has been in the last 20 years, how much this has increased. One of the things, and I've not read the solidarity budget in depth for the 25-26 cycle, but they have some, exciting ideas about, a guaranteed basic income for people here in the city, like a city-based. And it is sort of at odds with our new conservative city council. I mean, new, a full year right now, but and the austerity measures that they are talking about, and they're, so your policy, specifically your analysis, what are some of the cuts that you are seeing coming down the pike that you want to push back on, that you want to stop? Where are your priorities as far as the city budget goes?
We have cuts to our Office of Labor Standards. And for listeners who don't know what our local Office of Labor Standards does, it is one of our local lines of defense and protections, especially for minimum wage and domestic workers. They investigate cases of wage theft locally. And there are cuts to some of the outreach work, as well as positions within that office, which of course we know many people don't know their rights. I know when I was a waitress, I had my tips taken from me under a guise of, I don't know how to give you your credit card tips, so you can only get your cash tips. I back then didn't know what kind of resources I had to push back. I was just grateful to have a job, felt like I couldn't lose it. So cuts to our local Office of Labor Standards, in terms of, I think it's 2 FTEs. I know at least one for sure that is a civil rights analyst position, and then some cuts to outreach specifically. We also are seeing cuts to tenancy services, and I'm fearful that this is flying a little under the radar, because a lot of our tenancy services and support, so like, again, knowing your rights if you're a renter, those cuts are coming out of SDCI. So, our department, SDCI stands for Department of Construction and Inspections. There we go. So an unsuspecting department, this is not something within human services, but rather it's funded through this department. So we're talking about cuts to, the ability for minimum wage workers and renters to know their rights. especially coupled with the increasingly challenging conditions that people are being put through. Affordability for this city is so challenging as it is, and just becoming harder. And now we're cutting our basic city supports to be able to do that in reach and support people so they don't become destabilized. Concerning, concerning to say that the least. And I think there's, other things we can also talk about in terms of, there's some cuts within the Human Services Department. I'd like to know and understand like a little bit more about why some of those programs are being cut. So I want to assume, or I want to ask some humble questions about, what is it about this program? Like I believe we are seeing some cuts to an elder care program, if I'm recalling correctly. Yeah, it's case management support for aging and disability services. Have some questions about why that's happening. We're also seeing things like, Department of Neighborhoods reducing their food equity awards. And, as we've mentioned, there's, more of our mutual aid networks are tapping into, are having to provide more for people because we are seeing more food insecurity. So how does, again, that cut align with some of the reality of what we're seeing on the ground? Those are some of the immediate things I would say in terms of, some of the cuts that we're seeing. Oh, last thing, we're also seeing some cuts to libraries, not in terms of library hours, but some for like the tech support pieces. And we know SPL recently just grappled with some pretty hectic things happening with their tech infrastructure, which I think it's really important, especially given the rise that we've seen our libraries start providing more ebooks as well. So again, those are some of the immediate things that are popping out as concerning. It's important to note that much of what is characterizing this budget is the usage of Jumpstart funds, which is one of our few progressive tax sources. We're using a surplus collection from that tax because it is performing so well. It's collecting more than was originally anticipated. And we're using those funds not only to cover deficits, but also fund a number of specific programs, but we're seeing cuts in other areas. The last thing I'll say is I think we should celebrate a little bit for a moment that this progressive tax that was met with ire at the beginning, that was met with scrutiny at the beginning, is kind of saving the day. Being able to be tapped into to cover city services. And so like, let's celebrate that for a moment, but also say we're using funds from this source, this fund source that is really designated to go towards affordable housing, equitable development, our Green New Deal initiatives, and most recently added funds for behavioral health, mental health supports for students. It's still going towards those things, but it's not fully invested in those things. It's also covering in other areas. So what would it mean to actually fully realize that investment? And I think we'd be seeing a lot more change in our community if we were there. So I want to get us there where we are fully investing that money into its intended purpose.
Yeah, no, I think that is important. It feels like it's part of this whole one step forward, two steps back. We get a win with a progressive tax, and then they start bleeding that tax to fund other services. And rather than finding new ways to fund those services, finding new taxes or increasing the taxes to fund those services, which, brings us to the progressive revenue. Like we are, for all of the mythos about Seattle being the super progressive city, it doesn't show it as far as the funding goes. It doesn't show it as far as, I'm sure I brought this up last time, but there is that metric that Brett Hamill, who writes for I think South Seattle Emerald, is a comic, right? Like years ago, he created this metric that the Seattle was more progressive the farther away the policies were, right? The inverse square law of Seattle progressivism, and while it's here, we're really plagued by a lot of people who are very comfortable with the way things are, and they will fight any change. So talk to me some about how you can, what are some of, and I'm going to apologize to listeners and say, like, a lot of this stuff sounds sort of incremental and it sounds very specific and wonky. But this is this is how cities do business. This is the reality of how we impact our lives and the lives of our neighbors. And the big slogans about, oh, we need universal health care, or, oh, we need a universal basic income, universal education, guaranteed housing. And I agree with all of these things. But on the ground, this is where the money is doled out, the money is created, the money is distributed, and people are either served or harmed, frankly. And so if you're a listener, like, please dig in a little bit and understand that, like, this is the reality. This is the reality in every city. This is the reality in every state. This is how we have to do this work. And it's complex, and it's difficult to understand sometimes. And I'm going to come back to that. But for now, talk to me about what progressive revenue sources do you see that we could go after? How can we boost those services that are currently pulling the funds from, like, the Jump Start?
Yeah. Are you giving me permission to wonk out, Mark? Am I
I
hearing you correctly?
I absolutely am. Yeah. I want people to understand that this is going to, this might be a little technical, but this is where we need things to be, right?
That's what the show is for.
Ducking away here for a second, because I actually have a fantastic report next to me from the Transit Riders Union called Progressive Tax Options for Seattle. For the nerds in the audience like me, who really want to understand what tools are available at the local level, or also understanding, there may be a tool, but maybe it's not legally allowed per state constitution or what have you. This report actually details 26 different options. So it really breaks down, what are progressive tax options related to personal income or wealth, related to business activity, or related to property, land, and transportation. This was one of the baseline reports that also fed into, a progressive revenue task force that was stood up, that included business partners, that included elected officials, and they kind of winnowed in on a subset of these, but then also found through winnowing more in a legal analysis, we only really had like 2 that are legally allowed on the local level. And those include the Jumpstart tax. So that's a payroll expense tax, as well as implementing a local capital gains. Those are the 2 that seem the most legal per an analysis. Of course, we want the state to be able to create more options for municipalities to pursue. Again, another shout out for Sean Scott, our hopeful representative of the 43rd, and why we should have connections with our state delegations so they can understand the needs on the local level, and we're moving, in tandem. And the state of Washington has a statewide a statewide capital gains tax in place. It's important to note for listeners who are not familiar with some of the statewide initiatives happening this year that'll also be on your ballot. I hope you'll indulge me. Let's take a moment to talk about it. There's a lot on the ballot this year, beyond me. And we have, elections for state positions. You're going to be voting on governor. You're going to be voting on probably judges, insurance commissioner, commissioner of public lands. There's a lot. And we have the added element of 4 initiatives that have been put forward and are backed by a local, very wealthy hedge fund manager known as Brian Haywood, and he runs this organization or entity known as Let's Go Washington. And they've put out now a total of 7 initiatives, and they have, paid signature gatherers going out across Washington collecting signatures on these things. And many of them are repeals of existing laws that have been recently passed that go after a myriad of issues. I want to talk quickly about the 4 that you'll see on this ballot, and then we'll dive in on one of them related to this topic about taxes. The 4 that people will see on this ballot this year, and I'm going to try and remember the numbers. We have a repeal of the Climate Commitment Act. This is Initiative 2117. I will say off the bat, I'll be voting no on all of these initiatives. I think they represent a step backwards and major disruptions for services and programming that we desperately need across the state. For those unfamiliar with the Climate Commitment Act as it stands, it is one of the only taxes that we have on our state's polluters. So it's a cap and trade style program, having polluters essentially pay, and those funds then go towards incredible important things. Some of those things include bus fare. So transportation for young people across the state right now is free. That is paid for by the CCA. It also funds wildfire prevention programming, and while our entire addressing wildfires in Washington state. We know that we're having smokier summers. We need to have funding and resources available to mitigate and combat that, to save lives. And it also funds a number of green infrastructure projects. I know I was recently working at the University of Washington, just to point to an example. Entities like the University of Washington are receiving funds from the state and out of that pot of money to transform their energy systems away from polluting energy systems like gas into more green infrastructure and energy. The UW is just one example, but there are entities across the state that are using funds from essentially a tax on our state's largest polluters to actually start building out our green infrastructure. So we are talking about a just transition that the CCA is helping fund. So the repeal of that obviously would mean that would stop a lot of our important work. Transit agencies have also raised the alarm that there would be, a tremendous loss of funding for our entire statewide transit system as a result of this. That's a little bit on the CCA. I'll be brief on the others. There's also one related to the Washington Cares program. This is a long-term care program that was implemented a couple years ago. This creates actual stability and support for folks in their old age. The initiative on the ballot will give folks an opt-out option to essentially opt out of the program. That sounds harmless in itself, but it would essentially just kneecap the entire program as it stands, and the entire financing model would fall apart. And this means that our lower income neighbors, folks who maybe haven't saved as much in their old age, would erode a possibility of having a safe, healthy end of life type of care and old age care. The next one is related to also climate. You'll often see it referred to as stop the gas ban. There is no effective gas ban. It's really in response to a bill that passed the legislature related to working with some of energy companies, namely Puget Sound Energy. There was a bill that was passed related to trying to get them in a process of moving away from gas infrastructure and supporting the planning work for more green energy alternatives. And that plan essentially, or I should say, this would kind of undo that legislation. It kind of creates a way to create more protections for our gas infrastructure, which, reminder for those, gas is methane. It is a pollutant. Right. And so definitely read more about that one. It's the newest one of this slate. It was introduced later. So definitely take a look at that one. And the last one I'll say that is most important for this conversation is then a repeal of the statewide local capital gains tax. The capital gains tax was implemented just a couple of years ago. We've really only seen the funds for that come in the past couple of years. It goes towards funding. The funding really goes towards our young people. It's supporting young people in schools, and it's all good stuff. And the last thing I'll note on this is we know Washington has a really regressive tax code. Since capital gains was implemented, we became the second most regressive tax code in the country. Before, we were the first. So now we're only second to Florida. If this went away, we'd be more regressive than Florida. So something to consider. And again, it will be a major loss of funds that are currently going towards supporting Washington's young people. So thank you for indulging me on that. I encourage you both, if there's anything I missed in those, I know there's a lot of details and discourse about those initiatives, please fill in. But I thought it'd be important to mention, since we're talking about taxes, to at least talk about, we are seeing a proposed repeal of one of our few progressive taxes that'll be on folks' ballot this year. And so encourage you to read more. But is there anything, Marc, you'd add?
No, I mean, I really want to thank you for pointing those out. I agree that, listeners who are in Washington State, read into them, but absolutely, like, my baseline is I vote for new taxes, even when they are regressive, because it's the lesser of two evils. Like, sure, sometimes taxes are bad for poor and working people, and yet services are good. And that is how cities and states provide services. Those four particular initiatives, we absolutely need to defeat them at the ballot box. It is going to be critical. I want to thank you for pointing out the quote, the gas ban. Stop the gas ban. Infuriating. Yes, natural gas is methane. It is like 30 times more harmful in the environment, or more harmful than CO2 when released into the atmosphere. It is colorless. It is odorless. You can't tell when it's leaking unless you have really specific equipment to look for it. And energy corporations are allowed to just self-report whether or not they are leaking stuff or not. So we need to move away from natural gas, and it has become, America's now like the world's #1 natural gas exporter. And we are, fracking and pumping and filling ships and shipping them across and at every step shit's leaking. And we are like, sure, yeah, it is a little bit better when you burn it in a power plant than coal. But I think that it makes up all the others, and it's not the answer. It's not the answer for a green energy transition, and calling it natural gas. Infuriating.
Coming up,
please.
I just want to tell a quick story on natural gas too, because I've worked in anti-hydrofracking movements actually in New York State. I worked on banning hydrofracking within New York State. They had not, we were back when I lived there once upon a time. The state had not been fracked at all, yet it had been a discussion with then Governor Andrew Cuomo, and I was a part of the ban hydrofracking campaign, which was successful, which doesn't happen often in organizing when we have a win like that. But growing up, actually a long time ago, and some people know, I was born in California, but Washington is home and Seattle is home. But I was born in California, and when I was in school, I remember coming home after school one day and hearing a giant boom. I encourage folks to look into this, but a neighborhood within San Bruno kind of blew up, all because of natural gas leakage. I believe 11 people were killed, but an entire neighborhood went up in flames just like that because of unmanaged gas lines. And I often talk about this as an example to say, we can talk about natural gas as a less harmful energy source, but also the consequences of not doing the infrastructure and care work to make sure it's operating well had deadly consequences for that neighborhood, which is still a giant dirt patch in the ground when I've gone back even recently just to see. So again, it's a highly volatile, dangerous energy source. We know many energy sources are, but I often point to that example to say it happened. It happened though. So same, we need to be holding energy companies and utilities also accountable for managing and keeping up the maintenance on all of our energy sources, and to make sure they're operating in a healthy and safe way as much as possible, and moving towards the safest energy alternatives always.
Yeah. And if we weren't as a society so invested in socializing risk while privatizing profit, things would be different. If companies had to be held liable for their profit-making decisions that end up destroying communities and ending lives, it would be a different metric. These things would not be as profitable, and we would move away from them. These are policy decisions. Okay, I want to talk really briefly also about the fourth initiative you mentioned, our capital gains tax. The reason Washington, which is not a progressive state, we have progressive people in Washington state, but the fact that we have no income tax makes us a tax mecca for billionaires. The reason we have so many billionaires per capita is because they don't have to pay for their income here. And so our capital gains tax was one of the few ways we have been able to counteract that. So again, that initiative, super important for us to keep that. And it is one of the ways we can start making the wealthy corporate entities and the billionaires pay their fair share. So let's pivot into what does a municipal based capital gains tax look like?
Yeah, we could be I mean, I think modeling off of what the state is doing, they're right now the state has like a 7% tax on personal assets. I think really shaping, what are the bounds of what we want to look at, that needs to be done and honed in with other partners at the table so we can actually analyze and say, how much would we want to raise? What does that involve in terms of setting the parameters for some type of legislation for that? And what are we going to fund? Because again, we're in a place where we're not fully funding our city services and we're dipping into this other pot to backfill. So are we going to focus on funding our city services, and what does that look like? And also even just I think we could all benefit from taking a step back from some of how we're thinking about this and just take a moment to say, what is it we want to do together? What is the role of the city? What are the basic services that the city should be providing? And where do we want to go? And what are the kind of outcomes we're looking forward to? And so just almost being a little bit, and I can keep I think it's the right way. This is where we should be going. We should be investing in people and communities again. And I can take a moment to say, I think we should be a little, clear and driven on, what are the outcomes that we're looking for and how are we being accountable to the broad public to demonstrate like this is the impact of this investment on the local level. And I think that's important from a protection place too for many of these programs. I talked to a lot of voters out on the street saying like, I'm paying all these taxes and what for? What is happening? And I do think to an extent, government has a PR problem. There is progress that happens and then we don't talk about it. And so part of what I often highlight with people when, they're frustrated and they're saying, like talking about waste or talking about nothing getting done, I try and highlight some of the things that we know from data are working. Things like when this region got 1,400 vouchers from the American Rescue Plan, we were the first region in the United States that successfully leased up all those vouchers, meaning that 1,400 people got 10 years of housing affordability, 10 years of a voucher subsidy. And we know vouchers can be challenging to use, but there was a strong partnership across the board and quick streamlining to make sure we were finding folks that would be a good fit for that voucher. So somebody who just needs a subsidy, doesn't need additional kinds of supportive stabilization services, and working across homelessness service providers, housing authorities, and with local landlords to find and place folks into those properties. We were the first area in the entire United States who did that, meaning that we showed some real efficiency. When we have a housing resource, we move quickly and we efficiently get folks into it. And then we also have a number of programs that do operate well and successfully resolve areas, get folks into housing, successfully are feeding and addressing hunger. And so I try and ground things also into a place of there is good work happening. It just doesn't always get a headline. And that is a reality I think we're all coping with. But I bring these examples up to say, if we're going to pursue new progressive taxes, especially with all the weight seemingly against them in this state, I think it's going to be really important that we also get really clear on why are we taxing? What are we hoping? What are the measurable outcomes, so to speak, that we can expect to see from this investment? And how are we regularly communicating that? But I think that conversation needs to happen very soon because the needs are high. We got to get moving. So let's start doing it.
Yeah. How do I think that's really critically important. And you said a thing there, it's really easy. And people on the left, not even people on the left, people in this country focus an awful lot on what they don't like and what they don't want. And, we had Jeff Paul from How's Our Neighbors on a few weeks ago. And he talked about that process that How's Our Neighbors went through about the social housing initiative of how we say, okay, well, we know what we don't want, but how do we work out what it is we want? And so I think that's really a critical step that you pointed out, that we need to step back and say, What is it we want our city to provide? What is it we want this city to look like? That's, I'm not going to say more important than how do we get there. How do we get there is really important, but the how do we get there is where it gets really wonky. And I think where we sort of have this falling down is that we are not communicating, neither defining nor communicating very well the what we want. And the other side, the austerity side, the profit extraction side, they pay people to craft these messages and to devise this propaganda about, because that's all people listen to is the surface level, right? The actual policy gets difficult. So how do we spend time communicating? This ties into another question I had for you, which is just about how you process and read all this. Like, do you have staff members? Again, the other side, the austerity side, they have lobbyists who fucking craft all these bills for them and who do all this analysis so that the lawmakers themselves don't have to worry about it. They can just listen to the people who are giving them the money and they know what side to come on. So how do you dig through all this and make it understandable? And related to that, how do we, as a broader sort of activist left, define what it is we want and then package that and market that and share that and spread that in a way that is understandable and catchy and compelling?
Yeah. Oh, I love this question. Okay, I'm gonna add a finer point to what we're saying in terms of also the right, so to speak, our austerity folks, because let's talk about Let's Go Washington. I'll hand it to them. They have great branding. And so I also have the numbers pulled up. So let's talk through each of these very briefly and just say how they're talking about them.
Yeah.
I-2066 is called Stop the Gas Ban, Protect Energy Choice. This is one about protecting gas infrastructure.
Right.
Then we have, let's see, I-2109, repeal capital gains tax. Don't punish innovators and small businesses. Then we have, here we are, I-2117, stop the hidden gas tax. The carbon tax equals higher gas prices. This is the climate repeal of the Climate Commitment Act. And then the last one is I-2124, opt out of state-run long-term care coverage act. Give workers a choice.
Give workers a choice, right.
So to your point, on the surface, you hear these things and say, yeah, I want to give workers a choice. I mean, shoot, that sounds like union language. Like, let's give workers choices. Let's give workers rights. Like, they're very carefully evoking things that the average person would say, yeah, I could agree with that. We can do that too. And I think some of the big messages that we've been trying to, and I say a lot of credit to the coalition we've built and the people that I've been working with to craft this, because we're very serious around the fact that I think a lot of Seattle is more united and in sync than we think in some ways. When I would share from my experience being out on the doors, having our folks out in the field talking to voters, people want housing affordability. People really are concerned about the housing crisis beyond just our folks who are sleeping rough, living outside, also even thinking about, their own rent, thinking about, and even when I talk to some of the elders and older folks who are homeowners, they're thinking about if their grandkids are going to be able to stay within the city. I've had a number of conversations with homeowners throughout the city who tell me, oh, my grandkid had to move to Everett. I miss them so much. That's the only place they could stay. I only get to see them a couple times, or they're moving out of state. Like, it is, I bring these examples up to say it's front of line for a lot of folks thinking about who can afford to live within the city and how it's kind of disrupting family networks and community. And thinking about, I would say housing affordability is uniting folks across the line. Everybody's really worried about it. while also thinking about the fact that, a lot of folks are, I've yet to get pushback on the doors saying that corporations and the ultra wealthy should pay what they owe back into this community. That is a really popular sentiment because so many of our local tax tools really do put more onus on working people. So when we're thinking about, the sales tax, I think we don't think about as much because you don't get an individual bill for a sales tax. It's just on your receipt. But we know people will bop down to Oregon to make an expensive purchase sometimes.
Mhm.
And we have a bunch of upcoming levies within Seattle that I'm starting to hear from folks who are fixed income homeowners who are like, oh my gosh, every year my property taxes keep on going up and my income's not going up. These are really critical services. I'm not going to vote no because on this transportation levy, because the transportation levy funds a third of SDOT and we need to fix our roads and keep our buses running. But the math is not looking great for me.
Right.
And so, some budding concern on these points where people are recognizing that something in our tax system just doesn't feel quite fair, and looking around and seeing again tremendous wealth, prospering businesses locally. How is this translating? And then I think the last thing I'd say is some of the pieces too around public safety. I don't think people were seeing gun violence in community. We had, I live by Garfield. We had a young individual who was killed at Garfield. Our young people are not feeling safe going to school. We know that people are generally feeling unsafe about riding buses these days. We know we're seeing overdose deaths on our streets. Those are all scary realities that make it hard and are giving people a feeling of unsafety in this city. And being able to invest and make sure, like, we should be able to have a system where if something violent and dangerous is happening, you should be able to call and have somebody quickly respond and act in an ethical and well-trained fashion to address and respond. Having a quick response, not only that, but also the right response. We should be having folks you're able to call to deploy a behavioral health response, emergency medical, what have you. That kind of vision for a public safety system, people across the board really want to see, actually. We may have some different ideas of how to get there, but across the board, people, I continue to hear about folks who call SPD because somebody's wielding a machete in front of their apartment and SPD is not coming for 6 hours. That's not acceptable. And then we continue to hear about also cases of misconduct that have been documented in the paper about SPD. We should be able to ensure that law enforcement officers that we have are engaging in proper behavior and not perpetuating inequity, systemic racism, sexism, and what have you. And so I'm going off on a little bit of a diatribe. I hope you'll indulge me, but I think that some of the messages that we've brought forward in our campaign, thinking about, again, not just Band-Aid solutions, but getting us where we want to go. We want to have a community that is safe, affordable, accessible, and paving the way for a healthy future. And those are messages that are resonating with a lot of folks. And we're going to need a real coalition of people that we're continuing to build to keep beating that drum to say, it's beyond just this campaign. We need to have folks continue to show up for these causes in the years that come, not just at the ballot boxes, but within chambers, writing in, making that push, just saying this is, this kind of investment is what would bring more affordability. Therefore, I support it. And I think we're going to have to continue to really hone in on our PR messaging too. And this is why the last thing I'll say, you'll see me really point to, the data in some of this. I'm trying to be very clear that this isn't just ideologically driven. This is actually data driven. We've done a lot of studies about the impact of these kinds of investments and the results we can see from it. We should be guided by those things. And in an age of misinformation, I think people are really exhausted by misinformation, and people are kind of looking for and hungry for, like, what is the truth here, actually? And I think being able to put front and center and say, here's what the data says for us, and here's how we're going to try and move and act accordingly. We should scrutinize and always ask good questions about data. We should be critical thinkers about data, and we should be having that a part of our conversation, so we're not just having ideology fueled discussions. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, Mark, about how we PR as the left about these things, but those are just kind of the initial points about how the messages we've brought forward in our campaign, which I think are resonating with a lot of people across the spectrum, and some of the ways that we're again trying to say this is not just an ideology. These are things that are evidence-based and data-driven, and we can actually move forward with them. So do you have any follow-up to that?
I have thoughts. I'm not sure. How do I phrase this? So a lot of these words, which I agree with you, are really important. Let me start with that. Like, people should feel safe. We should have real public safety. And that often does not mean having thugs with guns show up who have the authority to extrajudicially torture or murder members of this community. We should have evidence-driven and data-driven decisions. And yet, somehow those words are used by the austerity members of our community to say, well, we can't do these. Like, we have the data. I'll use a more nationwide example. There's a group, the Texas Transportation Institute, that demonstrated conclusively decades ago, in the 70s or 80s, that building new roads does not ease traffic. That traffic behaves like a gas; it will expand to fill the available space. And yet, Houston just enacted an enormous new tax to once again expand their highways. It's I-405 was built as a way to drive around Seattle. Like, there was no communities out there, essentially. They just said, oh, let's try to avoid the Seattle traffic. Let's build this highway that goes around Seattle. And now 405 seems like it is evidence that there is not a benevolent God. It is terrible over there. And all it did was provide easy ways for wealthy people, lots of land. Bellevue was built to sort of extract finances from Seattle, it seems, and 405 facilitated that movement of wealthy people out of the city coffers, essentially. So I agree. We need to have data-driven. We need to have public safety. We had a shooting last year here, right by my son's school at the athletic center, and I was so proud of him for participating in a walkout to try to end gun violence here in his school. Like, kids should not be afraid to go to school. People should not be afraid to ride our transit system, and that comes from actual investment in our communities. It does not come from further austerity and terrorizing the most disenfranchised among us. So, and there's data to show that. I still don't know how to market it because they are so good. They are so good at that marketing. They are so good at, and I don't want to say, oh, we need disinformation on the left, but we do need to somehow market that better. And I think we fall into this trap sometimes of pointing down to the specifics that are the reality, the wonky stuff about the reality of how we make this happen. And yet, when people are so used to just listening to the surface and listening to the slogans, they check out when you talk about that. And I don't have an answer for that. I so applaud you for digging into that and working to understand that. And I'm
going to hold up one of these because I think this gets to another thing. Like, it's election season. We're all getting mailers. Here is, so we keep talking about the initiatives because I think the initiatives are a great example of ultra wealthy people trying to impede and put in policy in place that continues to benefit them. This is the Defend Washington. So against the initiatives, you'll see vote no. Maybe you'll get this mailer. Maybe you'll see it somewhere. But we are seeing money going into the no campaigns. And here's a little bit on the messaging. So vote no on 2109, no cuts to education, no cuts to childcare. Vote no on 2117, a bad deal for Washington. Vote no on 2124, don't increase care costs and hurt women. Vote no on 2066, stop higher energy bills. And so, I think there's something to the fact that like it's mailer season, these cost money. And we do not have as much money to the left. We don't. This was the result of fundraising. So part of it is, yes, having the good flashy message, even if it's a misleading one, like we see oftentimes on to the right and for some of these campaigns. And do you have enough money to get your message out to people? Whether it be through a TV ad, whether it be through printing these, which I'll say as a candidate, costs more money than I thought it would, but we print in a union print shop, so we're going to pay.
Thank you.
And it costs money to get your message out. And it's one of the other structural, unfortunate realities of our political system right now. Like, who even gets to hear your message, which is, again, so many reasons why, I'm trying to use my energy when I'm on the doors to not even just talk about my race, but talk about these initiatives too. So folks know, and they don't have to keep printing as many of these if we're just using the power of relational organizing to be talking about these too. So I think it's twofold, being able to have, the perfect crafted message, and a PR expert being able to have that flashy slogan like vote yes, pay less, and how much money. It's good. It is good.
It was good. Yeah.
Good. And do you have the money to get that message out? And that's a problem that we need to be addressing also to the left, not just even around campaigns, but also I'm always thinking about like, what's the continued messaging and work about our progress that we're getting out there for when we are implementing things? What is the impact of those investments and so on? So it's kind of twofold. I think we can be doing a better job at PR, and that will involve investment just to get the word out and show the public, talk to people about here's what these policies and programs can do and how it's showing up in your community, because it's just a fight for people's attention now. It really is. It's an attention economy. We're fighting with our phones. We're fighting with every form of media. And so it's going to take it investment. And I know that just makes it harder, because ideally we want to just put all of that money towards the programs, towards people and what have you. And we've got to get real around the fact that we need to get people's attention again and put facts in front of them, put our messaging in front of them if we want to start having some of this stick.
Yeah. I think that flyer, I've not seen that before. That's great. I think that's a catchy, the Defend Seattle, that is, I think that's great. We need more of that. I'm going to piggyback off of, your talk about how expensive that is for any local listeners. Hopefully you all know that we have democracy vouchers here in Seattle. I gave Adam a link so he could create a banner, but it's a really long link. I can't even really say it, but go to seattle.gov democracy voucher. Go to seattle.gov democracy voucher. But campaigns are expensive. These sort of flyers are expensive. If you are in Seattle and you have your democracy vouchers, I would encourage you to please donate them to Alexis. If you have extra money as well, let's get these donated out to the campaigns. Money is so important. It's so sad that we don't have publicly funded elections, but we've got at least a little bit of public funding here in Seattle. And it costs you nothing but a few minutes of your time to get online and click the link and say, yes, I want to donate my democracy vouchers. So let me make that pitch for you really quick.
Thanks.
It is so important. We've been talking for about an hour, and I always can go longer, and I want to step back just a bit, give a little bit of more surface talk. I want to talk about our existing city council. I want to talk about how they've been behaving, shutting down discussion, refusing to hear their constituents, calling the cops, hiding away in their offices to pass things that are clearly enormously unpopular. if/when, I'm going to say when, because I desperately want you in office. When you get into office, how will you help combat this sort of ignoring the constituents atmosphere that the current city council has developed?
Yeah, I think this is just a moment where like having strong vocal leadership matters, and having somebody on the dais saying we're having like we're having this kind of dissent for a reason.
Hmm.
This people have turned out for a reason today, and the power of public comment is critically important for creating a dialogue. Ideally, the dialogue with community is happening in the stakeholdering process when you're developing legislation. And how I think policymaking should be done, you do that hard work to be building bridges, building community, having those conversations, and ultimately you're putting forward legislation that has a broad coalition of support. You've problem solved, you have a solution that is supported by folks across the community. Doesn't mean everybody's in agreement, but you've built a coalition of folks that trust in your approach, that you've done the good hard work of fully understanding the issue, listening to perspectives of folks that are doing the work, who are most impacted by policy, and you put forward something that has a base of support. And public comment still is tremendously important in creating another open dialogue to in some discourse to allow the public to be heard. And so I think having an additional voice on the dais that is a voice of dissent to say, no, we should not cut public comment today, the people should be heard, I think is critically important.
Amen.
And it has to be said, using our if we're going to say that we have limited law enforcement resources and we're turning out as many officers as we can to silence public comment, I have some questions about, then thinking about, how are those officers then, how is that impacting our response times that we're saying we care so much about, and are important. I think if we're in a scarcity environment with those law enforcement resources, again, is that the best use of their time to be coming and showing up and stifling the voice of the people? I just have some questions. And of course, we want to make sure that we have safety in the space and so on, but having officers stand by to seemingly intimidate, I think it sends a message to the people. It really does. And this is supposed to be a time when the people should be heard. And I think it just should be said that having such a strong law enforcement presence in chambers and
Hmm.
during that time sends a real message about whose voices are valued and what can happen if you say something that council or some members perhaps just dislike. And so I think having just somebody on council who's saying, the people need to be heard. This is the people's time, and we will be here as long as it takes until everybody is heard.
Amen.
I hold that position strongly. We're hired by the people. If it means the meeting goes till 8 o'clock, so be it. And this this will be the only time I bring up some of our cities outside of Seattle. I've done a lot of work countywide. I've worked with, I've worked with all of the cities, and I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting the next day with some city staff or even an elected, and they're like, we had our meeting go till 2 a.m. last night because so many people turned out for public comment. People don't realize that all, with the exception of King County Council and Seattle City Council, all these other city councils in King County, these are part-time jobs.
They are. Yeah.
It's a part-time gig. Many of those folks, if they're not retired, they're gainful, they're fully employed, and they are just being a city council member in their free time. They're staying on till 2 a.m. It's happened so many times. The council meeting goes as long as it needs to go to make sure public comment is fully heard. And I've heard of stories of like 5 to 6 hours of public comment, if not more. And they commit to hearing everybody. And if the meeting goes late, it goes late. That is part of the job. And so I think just having a voice and somebody who values that on council, another position valuing that, will be really important. While also beating the drum to say, we need to make sure people are heard too before the council meeting where legislation's coming out. So both of those things are tremendously important and something that, I'm excited to really champion and model for the sake of, for the sake of the public. And hopefully hopeful future colleagues will follow in suit. I can be a little Pollyanna about that and say, let's see if they'll follow in suit, and just take this moment as a little bit of a reset. Who knows?
And we do pay our city council members pretty darn well, at least from the amount I make. And I think we should be able to expect that they are there to serve us. Amen. That they can stay up till 2 a.m. if that's how many people we've got commenting. And yes, if policing is so scarce in Seattle that we can't get people to show up to murders, how come we have so many of them lining the council chambers? Why aren't they out there responding to the murders? And why are I so much of what our council is doing I find infuriating. I wonder, like, they just approved that SPD can go ahead and surveil neighborhoods 24/7, but it's not their neighborhoods. I bet they would not feel the same way if we had some citizen groups setting up 24/7 surveillance of our council members, like outside their homes. They would not be thrilled about that. I bet suddenly we'd have SPD presence there if someone is outside Sarah Nelson's home with a camera 24/7. I bet cops are there harassing them frequently. Speaking of Sarah Nelson, that is the next seat that can be potentially gotten swapped. Like, that is the only council member that's up for election next year. What are your thoughts? I mean, I desperately feel Sarah Nelson needs to be replaced. We need to see her out of office as quickly as possible. You don't need to share names right now, but do you have thoughts of someone who could potentially challenge Sarah Nelson within your coalition?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something front of mind, because a reminder, I have to run again next year. This is not for a 4-year term. This is for a single-year term, and I will say it's a real joy to be running during a presidential election year with so much on the ballot too. It's just a very different type of atmosphere to be running in, and we'll see how it differs when I have to run again next year. When we win, hopefully we're successful. We're putting in the work to make sure that we win in November. And I think, many could assume that Sarah Nelson and I maybe disagree on a number of policy matters, and we'll do work together for the next year. But I know there's a lot of appetite and interest in the position 9 race for next year. I think there's interesting community, and we will see which amazing person, raises their hand to step up. But I think we should expect that, especially again, for many who have been keeping a close eye on council and wondering, is this council leading in a direction that's actually aligned with what Seattleites care about? And many would say no. And so I think we can expect to see a exciting position 9 race next year as well.
Excellent. Boy, I so hope so. And I've got concerns about your campaign. Let me phrase that a different way. I was so distressed in my in position 1 race. Was it a year ago only? Was it 2 years ago? I don't. When Maren Costa was running against Rob Saka shit, and she had the community behind her. She had everyone from the primary fall in line behind her. And what Rob had was a shit ton of corporate money that got dumped into the race at the last minute that saw him sort of push through the finish line. And that makes me concerned about your race, because you had overwhelming public support. Clearly, you've got the endorsements of people across the board, clearly. And again, for anyone out there listening, please, Alexis's race needs money, because the money makes so much of the elections. And so what is happening as far as corporate funding in this race right now? Like, we're in the last month now. We got 1 month until election day, essentially. And how is that shaping up for you?
Yeah, well, great question. It's the thing that is kind of always nagging in the back of my mind. I can only control what I can control. But we're doing a lot of work to show and demonstrate to anybody that'll listen. This is a campaign that is uniting people. We have built a broad base of support, and we're putting in the work. We're a force to be reckoned with. We saw my opponent receive $60,000 from the realtors PAC during the primary.
Mhm.
Seeing the results, I don't know how much that 60,000 really helped her, given that we came out with a 10-point lead. She ran last year and lost to Tammy Morales. And so I think kind of begs the question of, what's a valuable investment, especially with so much on the ballot this year? Are folks willing to take a chance and maybe say, okay, let's see maybe how this next year goes? I'm not in on that side, clearly. I'm not have ties to that community. So it still remains to be seen. But what I do know is that we're going to have a lot of people out voting this year. Our campaign is aligned with, and we have a lot of kind of shared coalition with other races that are happening. Like, I have a strong climate part of my platform. And I think there's a lot of energy related to climate voters this year to make sure that we protect the Climate Commitment Act. Similarly, we have a lot of energy going into this year to make sure that we are pursuing, we are making sure that we protect our statewide capital gains tax. And I am the only candidate in this race that supports progressive taxation. Like, I think there's a lot of connective ways that our campaign is connected to other things on the ballot. And I think having, tapping into that shared energy is really important, to make sure that we are kind of making the best of our limited resources. Similarly, I'm endorsed by the MLK Labor Council. They're also doing a huge push for this year's transportation levy. I'm your transit girly, so to speak, as somebody who doesn't own a car. And so, and I'm very upfront about that. And similarly, I talk about the importance of our transportation investments. So all of that to say, we are trying to connect the dots for voters to say, like, this race is also in support of these other various campaigns that you'll see on your ballot. And we're all just kind of trying to share our energy there, and hopeful that kind of additional work and being strategic about how we're sharing and talking about the things on the ballot will kind of help counteract whatever additional money will come in, just through the hard work we're doing in terms of voter education, getting the word out. Again, all this important mail that you're seeing coming out. So all of that to say, we will see how much big business decides to continue to support my opponent, but it seems like the investments to date haven't been particularly impactful, and perhaps big business wants to spend money elsewhere in this race. Again, it's a busy ballot. There's a lot of priorities. Maybe they'll look somewhere else. So we'll find out. Invite me back. Recap on whatever happens.
I would have you back so often. I enjoy these discussions. We've been going a bit here. I'm going to wrap it up. I know your campaign has got events coming up. In fact, you've got a phone banking this morning, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So let me wrap it up. And you're going to be here in West Seattle on Tuesday for some brief door knocking and a fundraiser at. Oh, I don't have it. Where's your fundraiser on Tuesday?
Yes,
I don't have it.
we
off the top
are
of my head.
having. Please come back. Thank you for mentioning the fundraiser. It will be at Mission Cantina at 5:30 to 7 o'clock, and we're being co-hosted. So for those who are also fans of King County Council member Teresa Mosquera, who previously was the position 8 Seattle City Council member, she will be there and saying some words, as well as the King County Executive, Dow Constantine, will also be there. So if you want some FaceTime, want to talk, like, that event is a great opportunity to just connect more with the base, hear some things, see again if what kind of questions you may have, and that'll be another space to just connect and engage on the campaign. And I'm a big fan and a huge pusher of relational organizing. It's also just a good space to go meet some other people who care about local issues, want to talk. It brings my heart so much joy when I'm in these spaces and I see people exchanging numbers or just kind of connecting for the first time. That's what this is about. It's about people at the end of the day. And we have a lot more in common and a lot more of our shared circles than I think a lot of people realize. So I encourage you to either come out to that event, or if you can join us with another door knocking or canvassing event. Those are other great base building spaces where we can just continue to connect and talk about the issues. And I hope you'll decide to join us for one of those. You can find out more about me at alexisforseattle.com. I can remember my website. So thank you for that plug.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so to wrap this up, let's go ahead and for those watching, let's run a banner of where people can volunteer. If we've got that banner ready, if not, it's a mobilize.us Alexis for Seattle, but you can get the link on alexisforseattle.com, because if you don't have the resources to volunteer money, believe me, as someone who's done some campaigning, having people who are willing to knock on those doors, who are willing to make the phone calls, is gold. It is gold. People, this is the relational organizing to a large degree, is having people who are willing to spend face time. So I made the pitch for you earlier about money. This is now a pitch for time. Please get out there, volunteer, spend some time, go to the fundraisers, go knock the doors, talk to your friends and family. We can have a city council that works for us. Right now, we don't. We don't have a city council working for us. We've got a city council working for the corporate interests, working for big money and big business. And we need one that works for us, everyday working people in Seattle, because we are the ones who generate all this wealth in Seattle. We are the ones that are making all this money and making all this productivity, making this such a dynamic place, and they are pulling that from us. So let's get someone like Alexis in office who will work for us and help us keep some of the amazing productivity and wealth that we are generating on behalf of these corporations. Alexis, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to the rest of this campaign, and I'm looking forward to voting for you, giving you my democracy vouchers, and seeing you in City Council Position 8. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you again for having me, Mark. I hopefully can come on back and we can talk about how this election season went.
Amen. That would be great. That would be great. All right, I'm going to let you get on with your day. I want to thank our listeners. Like and subscribe, and please donate your time, your vouchers, and your money to candidates like Alexis who are working for you, because this is not a spectator sport. And if you don't participate, we can't win. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth.